So today, I want to talk about goals and motivation. This is the Goal Doctor podcast, and I'm Dr. Brandon Gamble. And I want to share a quote with you to start, and it's by Albert E. Gray, and it's in his essay called The Common Denominator of Success. And it says that successful people have the habit of doing the things unsuccessful people don't like to do. They don't like doing them either, necessarily, but their disliking is subordinated to the strength of their purpose. When I was about 10 years old and struggling in school, my father began reading Albert E. Gray's essay to me. My dad was busy working on his own business and going up the ladder at work as an administrator in the school district there in Oceanside, California, where I grew up. And he was big on success, and he wanted to share that with me. And I'm so glad he did, because to some degree it comes intuitive, but that's after a lot of hard work with a young man who spent a lot of time in the principal's office. So quite often my dad would talk with me about the need to be more successful. So a quick review of last time, in episode 1, we talked about making goals, right? And making them measurable, observable, and doable, as well as looking at them as being concrete, current, and challenging. And we wanted to have mastery for the long term rather than just performing well for the moment. As I do the podcast, I'm growing as well, and I'm working on my mastery long-term goals versus just performance. So I actually recorded this podcast already, and it's stuck in my phone, and I can't quite figure out how to do it. So I decided to find another way to get it done. But the performance gave way to the mastery. This podcast has got to get out, and it's getting out. So there were some other things I thought about too as well, about different types of goals, whether they're SMART goals, right? And whatever kind of goals that you have, I think it's important that you have a system or a way to think about your goals and how you develop those goals. So having goals that are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based are extremely important, and that spells SMART. Again, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. I'm just pausing there because I know there's so many different acronyms and ways to think about goals, but I wanted you to at least consider another way. So I gave you MOD in episode number 1 and even in the promo, but I'm also giving you concrete, current, and challenging, and now SMART. So let's move forward to a couple of stories at least about motivation. So I'm always very excited about motivation because even as a student who was studying psychology at the great Oakwood University, or as a student who was studying at my alma mater for my master's degree, San Diego State, or the University of Southern California, I really didn't quite understand motivation until one of my teachers at USC really focused in on the 3 indicators of motivation. Yes, there are 3 indicators of motivation. I really wanted to tell a couple of stories about students who taught me how to really better understand motivation, especially when I wasn't motivated by the same things that they were, or motivated to persist through the same circumstances that they were motivated by. So let me give you those 3 indicators, and then I'll break down those stories. So first, active choice, right? People need to be participants in an active choice of their own. They need to have some sense that they've chosen this path, that they've chosen this thing that they're motivated towards. So active choice. Second indicator is mental effort. And I'm pausing here on mental effort because mental effort sometimes gets confused with like, oh man, do I have to have brain effort or whatever? But I see mental effort as something that you persist with in spite of, that you're able to deal with it in spite of. And these 3 all go together because the last one, the third indicator of motivation is persistence. Persisting towards demonstrating your own change as you progress towards these goals, right? So I'll say these again: active choice, mental effort, and persistence. So as a young school psychologist, a student taught me about being motivated in two ways. So I'll give you the first student, and this was kind of his own internal motivation, right? And I'm using that term very broadly, but his internal motivation and what really got him excited. And this seemed to be an external thing, but this is his choice, right? He chose, like, look, man, I have been in school now. I'm 14 years old. I did middle school, and these people tried to get me to do what they wanted to do. But man, now that the grades are important, I know I need to do better, but I'm not sure how. So we asked him, like, oh, well, what kind of things do you like? What would you see yourself working for? And he looked around and he said, look, man, to be honest with you, I like two things. And I really get excited about them. We're like, okay, all right. What is it? Orange donuts and orange chicken. And there's only one place here in Long Beach that sells orange donuts and orange chicken. And he said, are you familiar with the place? And I said, yeah, I am. I've never been there, but it's the only place that I know that sells donuts and Chinese food. And they happen to sell orange donuts and orange chicken. I said, that doesn't seem like a meal you'd need to eat every day. But he said, man, I could do it once a week. If I get all my work done once a week, I'd be more than happy to do what I needed to do. And he had to persist, his mental effort, right? He had to give his mental effort. He had to persist from week to week. And eventually, the idea was that he was able to persist throughout the semester. But going back to his mental effort here, he had many traumas, lived in a tough gang neighborhood, suffered from sickle cell anemia, right? So he would have these painful, blood challenges from day to day sometimes. And he'd have to go back and forth to the hospital. He had even started using marijuana to kind of curb his pains. But he wanted to persist and earn a diploma, probably be the first in his family to earn a diploma. So that orange donuts and orange chicken, it seemed strange at the time to those of us who were working, but for $5 a week, we were able to do what some of prior educators couldn't do, but we also had to be willing, right? We had to be willing as those who were working with the students. And I'm going kind of through these three indicators of motivation. We had to make a choice. Is this $5 a week strange meal of orange donuts and orange chicken worth it? Can we kind of let go of all of our so-called training that keeps us from saying that this is a good idea? And definitely we needed to talk with his parents about it, but also, will we be able to mark that this is progress towards change for this student? And we were, and he made it at least through the first year. Unfortunately, his medical conditions got worse. Did not have to do with the orange donuts and the orange chicken, but he was able to find a better hospital in another state, and his family moved there. But I was just very, impressed by him being willing to think about what would it take for him to stay motivated. That's one student. Another student who I'd worked with and a colleague of mine had worked with, and this other school psychologist had met this young person in middle school who had been abused and harmed by a family member, which led to some brain damage, but also some mood swings, which kept the young person from being able to demonstrate his brilliance, because he was extremely brilliant, able to do at the top of kind of a really manic kind of phase, be able to do 2 days, do 2 weeks worth of work within 2 days. There we go. 2 weeks worth of work in 2 days, which was incredible to us, right? I just hadn't seen very many young people be able to do that, but he was able to do that. But he also really wanted to persist past kind of the pain and the trauma that he'd been with and deal with kind of this mental effort issue. And so he was willing to sit down and do counseling, willing to work on his breathing, willing to get in the meds and do what he needed to do, right? And this led to a great deal of persistence. He'd have his moments, and he got in huge trouble at one point for some of the issues that he had. But he was able to keep doing what he needed to do. So he persisted towards demonstrating his own change in spite of, and eventually I saw him maybe 4 years later at a university where I was teaching in the same city. And he came up to me and he said, Dr. Gamble, do you recognize me? And I didn't, because he had been lifting weights and put on muscle and grown a few inches taller. But he had persisted all the way to make it from a place in which many people had written him off, right? In fact, he'd even gone to jail for one thing or another because he had difficulty with impulse control. But he had gotten his life together, and he's earning not just some kind of easy degree. It was a very challenging engineering degree where very few young people had stayed in, particularly African-American young men, and he was persisting. It's beautiful to see, right? He had all these indicators of motivation. And I simply wanted to encourage him because he was in an area in his life where I hadn't experienced. I had support. I didn't deal with the trauma. So although I can read about it and theorize about it, I didn't know and live it. And he had lived through it. So active choice, mental effort, persistence, whether it's orange donuts and orange chicken, right? And so some things that I really took away from these young folks who had challenged me to think beyond my own limitations about what can be is people in our lives, they can choose what motivates them. They can reach towards something that's important towards them. Sometimes we have to help them kind of see the clarity of the choice, if it's really, dealing with something that may harm them. But I want us to kind of have some illustrations of these three indicators of motivation: active choice, mental effort, and persistence. So as we close here, I'm curious as to how you're doing reaching your goals, right? It may be the start of the year for you as you're listening to the podcast here, or it may be a time in your life where you're changing. Let me know if you have any questions at drbrandongamble.com, or let me know your success stories or even your challenging stories, because, you may get a chance to learn, even though it may seem like you didn't quite reach your goal, you still learn something in the process. All right, so next episode, we'll talk about how making an active choice helps us stay motivated towards our goals. And we're going to drill down into those three indicators of motivation a little bit more in each podcast. So I have some more examples and illustrations. That said, thanks for listening. I'm the Gold Dr. Brandon Gamble. I hope you've had a great time in this moment we shared, and you continue to reach your goals.